Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, Aaron Gerke and Kevin Bender are engaging in conversation about meals. This comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and we talk about food in general, the way it affects our bodies, and then even into a real particular conversation about the Lord's Supper and what it is that we believe, teach, and confess as Lutheran Christians, and maybe how that differs from other experiences. But we really hope that you enjoy this conversation and that it will spur you on to having spiritual conversations as well. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Aaron.
It's good to see you again, bud.
Yeah, likewise, dude.
All right.
Good to share a cup of coffee with you.
Yeah.
I feel drawn to you, man.
What? Oh, because you haven't been drinking coffee.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, I was just saying there's something about, sharing a cup of coffee, sharing a beverage or food with someone that just...
Were you going to jump right into our theme of the day, like right from the get-go, Kevin?
It's a heavy theme. It's a big one. We got a lot to
Eating and
say.
drinking together, huh? That's it. Yeah.
Just for a moment, it is... Have you ever thought about that? Just like
What?
Eating and drinking together, like as something that... It's so basic to life.
Yeah.
But it's also like one of the best things about life.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there's not very many other activities I'm like, yeah, I like that more than eating and drinking with people.
Pause the tape for a second. Pause. Okay. Sorry, I'm not actually pausing it. But just hit rewind a second because our theme for today is all for one meal based on 1 Corinthians chapter 11. So that's why we're talking about eating and drinking. So we went right after it.
You're
today. Right. But unpause, fast forward. Okay, we're back. No, I would agree. And I have so many fond memories of experiences of life. But when I look back at what those fun memories were, there was like food and beverage involved in that, But sometimes we think of like eating and drinking just as a basic human necessity, but there's more to it than that. Actually, my parents they were up visiting, and they got a new table at their house, and they asked my wife and I if we wanted their old table, which this was the table after the last table that they gave to us.
Yeah. So it's like a new old table.
Yeah.
That's a new to you old
Yeah.
table.
So the table that we had, the first table that my wife and I were given when we were married was the table from my parents.
Which I think you actually talked about, right? Back in the fall when we were doing the Spiritually Vibrant Homes.
Yeah.
There was that Loud Meals or something like that.
Oh, did I talk about this table then?
Yeah, because it was like you grew up at it, now your kids are growing up
at it.
So this is like when you were talking about your parents coming with this new table, a part of me was like, oh man.
I know.
That table.
So they brought it and they wanted to unhaul it and they're like, all right, let's get out the old one or like take the old one out, get the new one in. And I was like, oh, can we like maybe tomorrow? Can we just put this one in the garage? And they're like, well, why don't we just get it in? And I was like, well, I'm not like that sentimental of a guy, but I mean, this is like the table that like I grew up eating at. Like I knew where my brother sat and where I sat, where you guys sat, and now that like all three kids have been raised around this table, and we eat a lot. Like we're very like we eat breakfast together and dinner together, and the kids and my wife eat their lunch together. Like it's a popular table. We've had guests around this table, all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not very sentimental about like pieces of furniture. Like I'm fine throwing stuff away, but there was something about the table that was a little bit harder for me. So I listed. So anyways, it didn't. The new one came in that day because I finally just said, fine, we'll get rid of it. And then I posted the other one for sale on a sales site. And so people came to get it. So I made sure to tell them about like the sentimentality of this. But then the woman who bought it, she goes, you know what? My boss was so sentimental about his like childhood table that he turned it into his office desk. So he's like this professional in town. And instead of having like an actual desk, he's got a dining room table
As his desk. That's awesome.
So I was like, shoot, maybe I shouldn't sell it. Maybe I should
repurpose it.
Yeah. Anyways. Yeah.
That's sweet, man.
So
sweet.
Table's gone, but you know, whatever. We'll make new memories around this new table. And it fits much better in our house. So
nice.
There you go.
No, it's true though. I mean, even when I think about my own childhood, you know, like kind of the sweeter moments, the brighter moments, like so many of them were just around the dinner table, like just this place you come to. And it was where, like, you know, I have 4 siblings, so we span, you know, several years. So like very few of us were interacting with each other in school at the same time,
okay.
right? So it's like everyone's gone every which way all day, but then dinner time comes and it's like, we're at the table. And this was like the place where we kind of shared with each other and caught up on life, and, you know, whatever goofy thing happened that day, you could talk about and unpack it with your, you know, family. And yeah, so it's, I mean, there's just something, but we do it every day, you know, we eat every day.
Yeah. But I mean, I just think too, like, okay, so yes, we eat every day, but as we make connections, and Paul does in 1 Corinthians 11 about, you know, the Lord's Supper being the thing that unites us together. Well, and it does in a that sacramental way for sure. But food has the capacity to do that in general. You know,
that's right. Yeah.
Sharing meals together. I mean, I again, like, I can think of these moments in my life where I've experienced different cultures, you know, through food. I mean, I think about like when I traveled to Germany and stayed in a host home on the border of Poland with this high schooler and his family, and they invited a bunch of friends over, and there was this like huge party because the Americans were in town, and it was just like my college roommate and I, and I mean, I don't remember exactly what we ate, but I remember we ate together and we drank together in this backyard in Germany, and it was this like cultural like and we talked to, I mean, I remember talking about like politics and presidents and wars and like all this stuff, but it was in this very just kind of this backyard, you know, experience. I mean, I was in Kazakhstan for a mission trip one time, and we went to this remote village, and we're in a yurt in the mountains, and we sat on the floor and ate bread and drank tea. Like, I mean, like kind of just, you know, these cultures coming together. I mean, in my on my vicarage, I was an intern in a suburb of Lakewood, Colorado, and I helped to start a ministry there called The Table. You know, a good name for it, where it wasn't a soup kitchen. It was intended to be like a gathering place for people of all walks of life, as we were doing a lot of ministry with the working poor and homeless people, meeting them, building relationships with them. So we started this ministry where we would come together at church, pick people up from the motels, and people from the church would come, doctors, lawyers, you know, pastors, homeless people, hang out, eat together, worship together. And just those experiences are like, well, yeah, there's something that really unites you with people over food. Like all those, the language barriers and economic barriers and racial barriers, all those things go away when you realize, hey, we're eating and drinking together. I don't know. Sorry, that's a lot of me just spitballing, but there's so many. Again, like I could just keep going of all these experiences of life.
Well, and this is so, like, just to give some context to Paul then in chapter 11. So on the sermon on Sunday, really all I talked about was the Lord's Supper, right? Yeah. That was kind of, there's so much there. There's stuff I didn't even talk about, you know, with the Lord's Supper. But contextually, Paul is also talking about some things going on in the Corinthian church, which was actually kind of pagan meals.
Yeah, right.
So, and it's what you're talking about, that when you share a meal with people, you're kind of in it together. You don't really, there's a participation aspect to that. And so in Corinth, you had these, you know, pagan worship sites where food was a part of the worship, which it is for us too, I suppose, when you think about the Lord's Supper. But they had Christians at the Corinthian church going to these assemblies, eating the food, but being like, well, you know, I don't actually believe that stuff. Right. You know, I believe in Jesus. I'm just eating. It's not a big deal. Right. They would also take the meats from some of those worship settings and then sell them at markets afterward as well. So it's not like you even had to go to the worship to engage in eating that food. You could pick it up at the marketplace And so some of the Christians in Corinth saw, their fellow brothers and sisters eating this food from
that had been sacrificed to idols.
That have been sacrificed to an idol, yeah. And they're like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. Like, I don't think we should be doing this. And Paul's kind of saying, well, he's saying, yeah, like, okay, food. It's not like food's going to condemn you.
Right.
Food doesn't have power over Jesus or something.
Right.
But there is this like participatory, like inclusion kind of mindset when you're having a meal with people, when you're sharing food with people. And so he says, yeah, guys, maybe don't do that.
Yeah.
Avoid it for the sake of these Christians who are, it's really kind of wigging them out to see eating this.
But that was a hard deal too, because I mean, as my understanding too, I mean, meat was oftentimes it was kind of hard to come by too.
Sure.
So like culturally in these pagan cities, like there would be those big festivals, and the meat there was meat available to the people, as part of that, and so it was hard because it's this cultural thing where you can have access to food and all this stuff, but it was food that was being sacrificed to idols, right? And so
I was trying to think of like a contemporary example, because that's kind of removed from us, right?
Yeah.
This idea, I mean, like I don't know. I don't feel like I find myself in that scenario where I'm in a marketplace where they're selling food that was offered to a pagan god, but maybe it has to do with, I don't know. Like I started to think of like different events, like entertainment events, and what it communicates for me to be at it.
Yeah. Those are hard. Those are real things. I mean, I think maybe a easy occurrence is just with alcohol consumption in general.
Sure.
So for some people, like, alcohol is a stumbling block. If they were alcoholics or raised in a home of alcoholics, like it can be a really like a challenging environment for them to be around. And so, like I think a connection would be something to the effect of like, is alcohol consumption going to condemn you? Well, no. Like, is there a place for you to consume alcohol in a way that may lead to unity and spiritual conversations with people who wouldn't otherwise have it? That's probably possible. But if there are also people there and like they're looking to you and respect you, and like your consumption of that affects them, and their ability to be connected to Jesus or to other people or to you, like, well, then it's not worth it. You don't need to do that. But if you would say like, but I need to do it, like I want to do it, and I don't care about you, then that's where you're like, are you a slave to the alcohol yourself?
Right.
Like if you can't see your brother or sister in need and be willing to sacrifice, your own desires for their sake, like, well, you should probably check your own heart in need, and that kind of stuff.
That's got like some echoes too there of even your sermon again on all for one morality, because it was that same kind of a frame of, can I do this? Can I do that? Why am I asking? And is it out of concern for my brother or sister? So often we think of those moral decisions as just what I kind of want to do, what I feel like doing. But I mean, Paul, he's trying to get definitely in Corinth when people are thinking of themselves and therefore dividing themselves, that kind of pride piece. He is really trying to get them to look to the other people, look to your brothers and sisters, and
So, Kevin, I think we've done a good job probably setting the stage of like the importance and the unifying factor of eating and drinking food together. And I think those of you listening, you can probably think of your own experiences going, yeah, that's right, tables, food, drink, like, it brings people together. We don't want to do that to divide one another. I think it'd be helpful, and hopefully for our listeners as well, if we let's get specific on the Lord's Supper some more. And maybe what is it that we believe, teach, and confess as Lutheran Christians, and how we get there, and why that's actually a beneficial thing for our faith. I think that would be a good conversation to have as well, and hopefully for our listeners too.
Yeah,
so
let's do it.
So Kevin, when you connected us in the sermon to Passover.
That's right. Yep.
Right. So there's one connection. Can you do that again, real kind of
briefly.
quickly for us? Like,
Yeah.
how did the Passover translate to the Lord's Supper as Jesus instituted it?
Exactly. So first thing to pay attention to is just that it is the Passover, is what they're eating together,
Yeah.
right? Jesus and his disciples, which is a leap for us because most of us haven't experienced Passover.
Yeah.
Passover was the meal celebrated by Israel forever, ever since the first Passover, which was when God came in with the angel of death, saw the bloods, the lamb of the blood on the doorposts that the Israelites had killed, slain, put on their doorposts. That angel of death passed over their houses, so they were saved. They were brought out of Egypt. And Moses is like, hey, let's do this every year. Well, I think God actually is the one who says,
Yeah.
do this every year to remember this act of salvation. So this is part of Jewish history, Israelite history, this, hey, we're remembering when God redeemed us, when God, he purchased us, won us out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay? And now Jesus all of a sudden starts switching it up,
Yeah.
and instead of doing the traditional Passover, he's reinterpreting it, basically, in light of himself, right? Which is all the prophets are pointing to Jesus too. So Jesus is saying, look, it's pointing to me. Like what I'm doing here tonight on the cross with my blood shed for you is in the same way going to deliver you, but in a bigger way.
Yeah.
So not out of Jerusalem, like it's not out of Egypt, out of Jerusalem, it's out of sin and death.
Right.
Yeah. So communion is connected to Passover in that way. It's Jesus reinterpreting it and saying, hey, everyone, I am dying for you, so you will live. Eat and drink my body, my blood.
Yeah.
You're good to go.
Yeah. And there's eating and drinking involved, right?
Mm.
And on Passover,
Mm-hmm.
the people that killed the lamb did what with the lamb?
They ate the body.
Yeah, they ate it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can imagine that when they ate that, they would be consuming knowing that it was that lamb's life instead of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always talk about the Lord's Supper too. I mean, in this tangible way, like we as Lutheran Christians, we take Jesus at his word. That he says, this is my body, this is my blood. We just say, cool, it is. And it is the bread and wine because it is, and it is his body and blood because he says it is, and it's this divine mystery. But we take Jesus at his word, but we also look kind of at, like, historically, scripturally, how God has interacted with his people from the beginning in tangible ways. God always shows up to his people. So we believe that he has the capacity to show up to us as well, and he does in the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
So eating and drinking is this very human experience where stuff happens, and what we eat and drink affects us. I wasn't planning on saying this, but
Ask me.
Well, right before we hit record on here, Kevin and I were chatting. He and I have been doing our best to try to live, healthy lives, and avoid.
We're attending to the way our bodies react to certain foods and beverages.
Yes, and so we were lamenting the fact that we ate and drank some things that our bodies didn't respond to super well yesterday. We don't need to go into
we'll spare you the details.
It's not that bad, but food affects us. Mm-hmm. This is the point.
Yeah.
Food affects our bodies. So like when I'm teaching about the Lord's Supper, like to confirmation kids, I've said there was this one kid one time who was like lactose intolerant, and he loved pizza, and so like we would have pizza for snack, and he would mow down on the pizza. And then, like, the rest of class would just be like, oh, my stomach hurts. And we're like, all right, so here's an example. What we eat affects our bodies, right? Yeah. When you put something in your mouth and you chew it and you consume it, it enters your bloodstream and it flows throughout your body, right? You think about, like, even the little capillaries, the tiny little, places that your blood goes. It goes through your big arteries and all throughout, right? There's blood in almost every single part of your body. So food enters your bloodstream. So you really are, in a way, transformed by what you eat and what you drink. So when we eat and drink of the body and blood of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of our sins, as Jesus promises, it transforms us into Christ-likeness. We will never be Christ, but
Mm.
when we eat and drink his body and blood, he enters us and changes us. And that's really cool if you think about it,
Yeah.
right? Because it was his life for ours. So
Mm.
when we talk about like the Passover being a life-giving thing to the people who are passed over, right? The Lamb of God that is given to us, we actually experience like his death and resurrection for us. His life enters our lives. Like, so not to there obviously are different Christian teachings about what's happening in the Lord's Supper.
Mm-hmm.
We're from a tradition, the kind of the historical tradition,
Yep.
that takes these things very literally and seriously, and not just symbolically as an act of remembering a past event that Jesus did for us. But you actually had a really cool connection that multiple people talked to me about after your sermon. I don't know if they talked to you, but you did this thing in the sermon where you're talking about remembrance, right? Because Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. And you said in the sermon, what's the opposite of remember? And automatically in my head, and I was sitting next to my wife, and she actually even mumbled it, like, forget. So I think you got everybody on that hook. Like, what's the opposite of remember? I think everybody collectively was going, forget. Did you do that intentionally?
Well, so yeah, and just cards on the table. This was not an original thought of mine.
There are no original thoughts, Kevin.
I'm glad you feel that way. When I first heard it, I did that.
Okay.
I said forget. Of course, it's like, yeah, forget.
Okay.
But then no, the opposite of remember is dismember, and that becomes a little more graphic.
Yeah.
When you start to think of that, the idea of a member as a part of our body, and so Jesus saying, "Do this in remembrance of me," and the idea of remembering. I mean, putting back together.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it takes us right back to the Garden of Eden. Think about it, man created in God's image. I mean, that's what we want. We want to be refashioned into Jesus' image. We talk about that even just eating the Lord's Supper, how we want to be turned more and more look like Jesus. Yeah. And this is Jesus. He wants it for us too. He says, "Take, eat. Like, let me be a part of you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
I'm glad it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Or that I just wasn't the only dummy when I first heard it. I was like, whoa.
No. A couple of people like after service were like, "Wow, that was really, really, really effective." So, yeah.
And this is just to go back. I mean, I think it is important to realize, that is the way the church treated the Lord's Supper. I mean, all the way up till the Protestant movement, really. Yeah. And we're Protestants, technically, but we still are in line with history on that one. In terms of how they always treated it in the Catholic Mass. I think they say "Hoc est corpe meum." Okay. This is my body. Yeah. And that's kind of a big staple there. And I mean, they have a slightly different view of us, I suppose, when it comes to. We can just talk about it.
Well, yeah. So I can do it real quick if you don't mind. So
lay it on us.
So in the historic Catholic Church, the Catholic Church would, when we talk about the body and blood of Christ, the real presence or the true presence, the literal presence of Christ, the Catholic Church believes in the real presence of Christ, but they actually believe that the bread and wine are no longer. Mm-hmm. So it's like this total transformation, or they call it transubstantiation, where it, like the substance changes, trans-substance, right? So that's kind of, if you want to think of it on a spectrum, that would be the Catholic Church totally transforms, but a presence of Christ. In a lot of other kind of Protestant churches, and there's varying degrees of this, but just to kind of put everybody into one lump and then put Lutherans in the middle. The other kind of extreme option is to think of it just symbolically, that what we're doing, that what we've been asked to do by Jesus, or even commanded by him, is to eat and drink this bread and wine in remembrance, thinking about the body and blood of Jesus and what he has done for us, remembering that he died for us and rose for us and that he forgives us and loves us. But when you eat and drink it, you should be thinking about that stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's just, nothing is actually like,
there's no
happening.
Yeah, no mystery, no mystical
God's not actually. It's a little callous to say God's not actually there, because if you ask them, they would say, no, God's there. Of course he's there, but
Yeah.
But it's really kind of dependent on that whole remembering act of what Jesus did.
Right.
The Lutheran Church is in the middle. Kind of Lutherans are famous for holding things in tension, I suppose. Paradox or paradoxes, just kind of holding two truths at the same time. So, I mean, I think our official statement is that we believe that Jesus Christ is truly present in, with, and under the bread and wine.
Pick your prepositions.
Yeah, right. What about on top of?
Yeah, around.
With? Yeah, well, no, with is one of them. All right, anyways. What that basically means is it is bread and wine because it is.
I mean, taste it.
We buy it from the store. Like, people made it. Like, there's ingredients in it.
Yeah.
Like, so, but it also is Jesus' body and blood. And then people want to ask, like, well, how did that happen?
Or when?
When does it happen? Like, is it when the pastor, like,
do you say the words right?
blesses it, or like it's this poof and then it was a magic show or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, we don't even go there. Like, it may seem like that to the observer or to the congregant or whatever. Like, if you're participating, it may seem like we're doing some sort of.
I mean, there's a process to it, right? But it's not formulaic in the sense of got to do this, and this, and then it works.
Right. So we believe that Jesus says, do this for the forgiveness of your sins, for the building up of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And I'll show up and I'll meet you there. And so it's this divine mystery. And actually the Greek word for sacrament is the word mysterion or mystery.
Yeah, that's actually the early church would just call the sacraments the mysteries, mysteries of God.
Yeah.
You know, pastors were stewards of the mysteries.
Yeah.
So, which honors that. And I kind of like, that we're in the tension there as Lutherans, because it, to me, also honors the incarnation, right? It's not like Jesus was only divinity.
Right.
It wasn't like he was just God floating around. No, he was 100% God.
Yeah.
But he was also in human form.
Right.
He had human blood.
In the flesh. We talk about the incarnation. I know this is a big church word, but incarnation, carne, right? You've been to a Mexican restaurant. The heading under meat, right? Carne is meat. So incarnation is in the meat, in the flesh,
in meat form.
Yeah, God came in meat, right? In flesh.
Yeah.
Right? So this is who Jesus is. God in the flesh.
Yeah. I was going to say earlier, it's kind of nice that the Corinthian church was so jacked up, because it's nice having Paul's words there for, we say them. I mean, it's kind of cool that this is those words, we say them. We repeat Paul's very words there, which were Jesus' words.
Right.
But we kind of use the way he structures the language of the words of institution. And that was the first time it was in print to the Corinthian church. Because the Gospels, I mean, it's not 100%.
Yeah.
But we're pretty sure the Gospels came later than the pastoral letters of Paul.
Yeah.
So, the first time that these words are in print is Paul's letter to the Corinthians.
Yep.
It's kind of cool.
Yep.
But obviously they were already doing it in the different churches. They didn't need his letter to tell them, here's the exact words. But
Yep.
But
so I think if we take these two things together, just the reality of where we started this conversation, that, meals unite us with people. They bring us together, this eating and this drinking. The Lord's Supper is this, you did these things, how it connects us.
Present to the past.
Us to one another, or individuals to community, and us to God, right? There's this really coming together. And that's why we value the Lord's Supper as well, and what we believe and teach, we take seriously, that we want people to know what's going on, because it is meant for the building up of the body of Christ. So there is with the Lord's Supper, there is an individual element, like this vertical dimension between what I experience in the Lord's Supper and what you experience. Like, we each individually receive the forgiveness of sins from Jesus Christ, and he meets us there. But we do call it communion, right? And it is meant to be done together. And that's that whole, like, 1 Corinthians 11 thing. It's, Paul says, you're not doing it together, therefore you're not participating in the Lord's Supper. So make sure you're participating together. So So this is why we actually like want people to kind of agree on what we agree on,
Yeah.
right? Like before participating together in this supper that's meant to build us up. Like if we're way off on differing degrees, or if we're not willing to forgive one another, or if we just believe way different things, then let's talk about those things first. But this meeting together and joining together with the community is meant to be a uniting thing. And so if we're not kind of even close in alignment with our understanding of who Jesus is and who we are, like maybe we shouldn't be doing this together in this place.
Right, yeah, your act of taking it with this group signifies, I mean, it's a declaration, an unspoken declaration of unity with this group. Yep. Just like any other, I mean, really any other like place you would go to. If you go to like a political rally for a candidate,
right?
Like I might not tell anyone, yes, I like this guy, but if I'm there, like in the place, like my being there, kind of says, oh, I do,
right?
Right. So yeah, it communicates things, and in a very real way, it does unite us as well.
Yeah, and I just in my own like kind of faith development with the Lord's Supper, experiencing it and stuff too, I've just found like this reassurance that Jesus meets us, and this eating and drinking does something to me. So like I guess I become more and more in tune to that reality, and it's been a faith strengthening experience, more so than just like a ritualistic kind of action that I go through, but just this reality that, even if I don't have my mind right, like even if I haven't like perfectly remembered what Jesus did for me on the cross, like I still walk away from that place still eating and drinking his promise for the forgiveness and life eternal, and it's in my body, and he's working it through my digestive tract and into my bloodstream. Like I leave that place and he's become this good work in me, and so there's a lot that's happening there, more so than just a ritual or just a thinking exercise or just kind of this, like Jesus is actually showing up to give you forgiveness to eat and consume, so that you go as a forgiven one and be transformed into a forgiver.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's cool that it is experiential. And we don't always maybe sometimes in our Christian lives, like so much of our faith gets relegated to our heads, but God actually wants us to like experience him, more than just in our heads, like to actually, to experience his love, and I think we all have unique times in our lives when that happens, but this is like one place where God's like, hey, like come and experience me, you all together. So it's kind of cool that we're joined in that way too, where God's like, taste and see, it's just a different, he gets that we're human. I guess he would, because he made us.
Yeah, totally.
So
to those of you who listen to this conversation at home, or wherever you are, maybe you're driving your car or
taking a walk,
maybe even cutting your grass. I don't know, did you cut your grass?
I have not.
Mine's getting a little long. My neighbor was cutting his grass, and I was thinking, is it a little early for cutting grass? I think it's a little early, but anyways, whatever you're doing while you're listening to this, maybe you're eating food. There may have been something new that you heard. I'd encourage you to think more about those things, but ideally, go and turn that into a conversation with somebody else and say, hey, did you know? What do you think about this? We want you to be people having faith conversations, and that's what we're just trying to model that for you. But on the other hand, if there's something maybe in particular about the Lord's Supper that you're curious about, if you don't have this kind of Lutheran Christian background, or even if you do, and you're like, whoa, I never knew that, or I've got more questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out to Kevin or I. We'd love having faith conversations with people. So lots more to be said, but I think it's enough for today.
Yeah, and hey, one last thing. Yeah. If you want communion, also let us know. We'd be happy to have communion, bring it to you, depending on where you're at. Obviously, we love doing it together here,
for sure.
With the body. But this has been a kind of a wild time, wild year,
Yeah.
and it's not something super out of the ordinary for us to go out and do with others too.
Absolutely, for sure.
It was great having this drink with you, Aaron.
Yes, Kevin.
Have a good week, buddy.
You too.